Were Cain and Abel gay? Today we're going to explore that question in an effort to figure out why God may have rejected Cain's sacrifice, as well as the reason why Cain killed Abel. But first, as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of future videos. As a quick refresher, Cain and Abel are the two sons of Adam and Eve. Their story is found in Genesis chapter 4, immediately after their parents were expelled from the Garden of Eden. Eve first gives birth to Cain, who grows up to be a farmer, and then Abel, who becomes a shepherd. One day, when both brothers offer sacrifices to God, God prefers Abel's sacrifice over Cain's. When God notices that Cain is upset, God essentially tells the boy to, well, check his attitude at the door. As a result of this, Cain takes Abel to the field and kills him. Later, when God asks Cain about the whereabouts of Abel, which is kind of a bizarre question for an all-knowing God to ask, but whatever, Cain responds defensively with the infamous line, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Then, after hearing the cries of Abel's blood calling from the ground, God curses Cain with hard soil and makes him a forever fugitive and wanderer. Cain pleads with God for mercy, and despite committing an act of sin, God grants him protection. This protection apparently comes in the form of some undisclosed mark, not all that dissimilar to the sign of circumcision for Abraham's descendants, which would have been used to identify themselves as God's chosen. Although this mark would keep Cain safe from assailants, he would forever remain alienated from others, well, except for his future wife, of course, and will never return home. Now, it has been debated for centuries, including in the New Testament, whether Cain offered a lesser sacrifice than his brother, which is perceived as being of high quality. However, Scripture does not specifically tell us that what Cain brought was not as valuable. After all, he was just a farmer. But then again, who wouldn't prefer lamb chops over eggplant, right? It has therefore been suggested that perhaps God displayed a preference towards the trade of one of the boys over the other. After all, throughout the Bible, God seems to gravitate towards shepherds, and this would then be the first time we see that preference taking form. Historically, shepherding was considered a lowly field of work, and in Scripture, God has a tendency to reach out to the downtrodden. With that in mind, Abel had the additional burden of being the second-born in a society that favored the firstborns, who, among other privileges, would have received larger shares of their father's inheritance. This may be why God, who serves as kind of the ultimate father figure here, chooses Abel's sacrifice over that of his brother. God may have been testing Cain and the reader by intentionally favoring the second-born over the first and the shepherd over the farmer. The question to consider is whether they were willing to believe that God could go against the grain and be countercultural. Now, when Cain becomes agitated, God's warning to him to master over sin that is lurking at the door should be a directive to all people who believe that they are favored or entitled. Because people in positions of power go to great lengths to maintain that position. And Cain is no exception. Since there were only two sons to begin with, Cain believes that by erasing God's favored one from the account, God has no choice but to prefer him now. This reflects how privilege can be maintained by marginalizing, or worse, eliminating those who threaten it. And that brings us to the queer interpretation. There are two themes that I would like for you to consider upon reading the account of Cain and Abel. The first, subversion of power and norms. God's deliberate choice to favor Abel's offering over Cain's challenges traditional power structures and societal norms. After all, if Abel was gay, this would highlight divine acceptance of LGBTQ+ identities, in contrast to mainstream society's Cain mentality of rejection, marginalization, and erasure of queer people. And secondly, queer desire and violence. The act of Cain killing Abel can be interpreted as a violent expression of repressed queer desires or emotions. In some readings, this violent act could represent a response to internalized homophobia or self-hatred, which tragically manifests as fratricide. After all, it's not until Abel is removed from the scene that there is mention of Cain finding a wife. The absence of women in this narrative highlights the potential for complex emotional connections and relationships beyond traditional gender roles. In short, the story of Cain and Abel offers a rich tapestry of queer themes and interpretations. Let us reflect on the lessons of this story and strive to create a more inclusive and just world. After all, when Cain kills his brother, he kills a piece of himself, for as brothers, they are of the same flesh and blood. Now, this isn't the only time a queerly coded story about brothers appears in the book of Genesis, for I believe the story of Joseph is the best representation of queerness in all the Bible. So if you're interested in continuing this journey with me, check out that video and be sure to let me know what you think.